Listening 4. Students on campus.
Listen to part of a conversation on campus between two students.
This is an interesting assignment.
It is. I'm just having a problem figuring out how to write up the report.
Oh? How much have you done?
Well, the introduction was easy. I just expanded on the information that the lab assistant provided, about the effects of alcohol on reflexes, and I used the same references that he cited.
Me too.
Then I described the experiment in the second part, the methods and materials section.
What did you include there? The lab assistant said that it was important to be specific when we did this part.
Yeah, he did. So I mentioned that there were 10 subjects, and 5 were drinking gin and tonic, but the other 5, that's the control group, they were drinking tonic only, and no one knew which group was which. Then they each had to drive in a computerized, what was it called? A simulator of a car that was supposed to be moving at 35 miles an hour. And when they saw a bicycle, they were supposed to hit the brakes.
So far, so good. The only thing I can think of that you might want to add is maybe a little more about the subjects. I think they were college students, and they were selected at random to be in the experimental or control group.
Good idea, especially the part about the random selection. That would be important information if someone wanted to duplicate the experiment. And didn't he say that this section had to be specific enough for another researcher to be able to
Replicate?
Yeah, replicate the study?
Okay, so what did you do with the results section?
That's the problem. I can't seem to figure out what to put in the results section and what to use for the discussion section. If I put the chart with the reaction times in the results, should I explain the chart in the discussion or what?
Oh, now I see the problem. The chart's fairly self-explanatory, isn't it? I mean, it's really a simple chart to read.
That's what I thought.
But you still have to explain the chart in the results section.
You do?
Yeah. Look, here's what I'd do. I'd look at the chart and try to come up with a few general statements. For example, all of the subjects who were drinking alcohol had longer reaction times. Then you can look at the range, 1 second to 4 seconds for the subjects who are drinking only tonic, and that's compared with 3 seconds to 20 seconds for the subjects who are drinking gin with the tonic.
So I'm really just repeating what's on the chart, but I'm explaining it in words.
Right. But here's the thing. You shouldn't draw any conclusions in the results section, just the facts.
You mean just what happened in the experiment?
Right. You have to save the conclusions for the discussion section.
Okay, so in the conclusions, I might say that driving after having 4 drinks, if you have 4 drinks, you probably won't be in a position to avoid an accident.
That's good. And you could also point out problems in the research, if there are any, or suggestions for future research.
Like doing the experiment with beer instead of hard liquor, or repeating the same experiment with 3 drinks instead of 4.
Sure, that's the idea.
18. What is the purpose of this conversation? (19) What is the study about? (20) According to the man, why is it important to mention that the subjects were randomly selected? (21) Listen again to part of the conversation and then answer the following question.
Oh, now I see the problem. The chart's fairly self-explanatory, isn't it? I mean, it's really a simple chart to read.
That's what I thought.
Why does the woman say this?
The chart's fairly self-explanatory, isn't it?
(22) Which section includes the conclusions?
Listening 5. Biology class.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class. The professor is discussing blood types.
Before we begin our discussion of blood types, let's review what we know about blood. According to the textbooks, about half of the volume of blood is made up of blood cells that begin as stem cells in bone marrow. And these stem cells can develop into any of the other kinds of cells found in blood, including red cells, white cells, and platelets. So, some stem cells become white cells or leukocytes, and these are essential to the immune system. And when bacteria or germs invade the body, some of the white cells form antibodies to resist the infection directly, while other white cells begin to work on the chemistry of the foreign substance itself to fight the infection. Now, compared with red blood cells, there are relatively few white blood cells, only about 1 for every 700 red cells, and the smallest of the blood cells are called platelets. But what they don't have in size, they make up for in numbers. Well, most of us have about 2 trillion of them, and they work to help the blood to clot and repair holes in the walls of blood vessels. But we need a way to transport the blood, right? Plasma is the liquid substance in blood that transports most of the chemicals, vitamins, minerals, hormones, and enzymes. But most stem cells become red blood cells or erythrocytes. They're the most numerous. As I mentioned before, there are about 700 to every 1 white blood cell, so the red cells give blood the color red, and they're important for what we call blood typing, and blood typing's what I want to get going on today. Now, blood types are a classification of red blood cells according to the presence of specific substances, antigenic proteins and carbohydrates, and you can see them under the microscope on the surface of the cells. The 4 blood types are identified by letters A, B, AB, and O. Blood type A contains red blood cells with the antigen A. Blood type B contains red blood cells with the antigen B. The AB blood type contains both antigens, and the O blood type contains no antigens. But the individual with this type can form antibodies containing either A or B antigens.
Excuse me, is that why the O blood type's considered a universal blood type? Because it can form antibodies with either A or B antigens?
Right you are. But in typing the blood, the antigens are really much more complex than this explanation might suggest. There are at least 300 different antigens. In fact, there are so many potential combinations that an individual's blood type's almost as unique as a fingerprint. But anyway, these basic types are used for determining compatibilities for blood transfusions. Before a transfusion's approved, hospitals always perform a procedure called a cross-match, which involves taking a sample of the donor's red blood cells and mixing them with a sample of the patient's plasma. You see, in almost every individual, the plasma contains antibodies that will react to antigens that aren't found on their own red blood cells. So during a transfusion, antibodies in the patient's plasma can bind to antigens on the donor's red blood cells when the donor's blood isn't similar to that of the patient. Well, many minor reactions can occur, like fever or chills, but some reactions are so severe that they lead to a spontaneous destruction of the red blood cells from the donor, and that can result in shock or even death. So you can understand why blood typing is so important. Cross-matching lowers the risk of a serious reaction. Okay, in cross-matching, we take red cells from one person and plasma from the other person, and we watch to see whether there's a negative response. Take a look at this diagram. It's on page 112 in your textbook. Here's what you'd be looking at with a reaction caused by incompatible blood. See how the cells clump together? The reason that this is happening is because there's a chemical reaction between the protein molecules in the red cells of one person and the plasma of the other. Now, look at this slide. This diagram's on the next page in your text, and this shows a compatible match with no clumping. See how the cells are evenly spaced? Well, of course, doctors prefer to use the same type as that of the patient, but compromises have to be made in emergencies. Type A patients can't receive type B blood, and type B patients can't receive type A blood. But back to your question, since an O donor has blood that's compatible with both A and B antigens, it's the ideal, or as you said, the universal donor. In an emergency, type O blood can be used for patients of all blood types. And fortunately, worldwide, type O is the most common, followed by type A. Relatively few people have type B blood, and the fewest have type AB.
Professor Stevens, can you tell us anything about artificial blood?
Well, actually, scientists have developed artificial blood that's been used successfully in blood transfusions with human patients. It's a white fluid, chemically similar to Teflon, the material that coats cookware and prevents material from adhering to it. The fluid can be used as a match with all blood types, and so the cross-matching step in transfusions, that can be eliminated. So far, artificial blood has done a good job of replacing the red cells by carrying oxygen through the body and eliminating carbon dioxide. But there are no white cells present, no antibodies, no platelets, so it doesn't clot, and it doesn't remain in the body very long. Still, continuing research along these lines should probably be encouraged. Even with cross-matching and other precautions, transfusions with human blood involve risks.
23. What aspect of blood does the professor mainly discuss? (24) Listen again to part of the lecture and then answer the following question.
Excuse me, is that why the O blood type's considered a universal blood type? Because it can form antibodies with either A or B antigens?
Right you are.
Why does the student say this?
Excuse me,
25. Why does the professor mention fingerprints? (26) In cross-matching, how does a compatible match appear under the microscope? (27) Why does the professor mention artificial blood? (28) Listen again to part of the lecture and then answer the following question.
Still, continuing research along these lines should probably be encouraged. Even with cross-matching and other precautions, transfusions with human blood involve risks.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
Still, continuing research along these lines should probably be encouraged.
Listening 6. Orientation session.
Listen to part of a discussion in an orientation class.
For the most part, college students don't read fast enough to keep up with the demands of their reading assignments. Let's just say that the typical college student reads 150 to 300 words per minute. Okay. The professor in the Western Civilization course uses the topics from Chapter 1 of the textbook for 3 lectures the first week of the semester. Each page has about 500 words on it, and that includes space for pictures and drawings. So, at 150 words per minute, let me see, each page will take more than 3 minutes to complete, and if my figures are right, that's almost 3 hours just to read the textbook assignment once through. That doesn't even count what you need to do to think and connect the lectures with the book. And you can be sure that there'll be additional reading or other assignments besides the lectures and the textbook. Have you heard about the ×2 rule?
Doesn't that mean a student should spend 2 hours of study time for every hour of class time in every subject?
Exactly. Okay, I think you'll agree that reading faster is important to success in college, so it's only practical to learn to read faster. And that's why I'm going to talk with you about the human capacity for reading and some habits that you may have that could be slowing you down. First, I want you to think about reading like you think about running. The more you run, the faster and farther you can go. And the more you read, the faster you're going to read. In fact, researchers hypothesize that our physical capacity to read surpasses our ability to turn the pages. In other words, our brains can take in the information faster than our hands can move. So reading 700 to 1,000 words a minute should be a reasonable goal for almost everyone. That'd be quite a time saver, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it sure would.
Now, let's talk about why most of us probably aren't reading at that speed, at 1,000 words a minute, why we're not doing that now. We know that we have the capacity, that our brains can take it in. But there are a few habits that prevent readers from reaching that target speed of 700 to 1,000 words. In the first place, some people are auditory readers. That means that they hear every word in their minds. Some people even move their lips so they seem to be speaking while they're reading. This is a serious problem because we can only speak about 300 words per minute, but our capacity to read, it's many times faster. So if you're hearing the words in your head or moving your lips, you know that you're preventing your mind from processing as fast as it can. Can any of you relate to that?
I can. I hear every word.
A lot of people do. Now, another problem's something called fixations. Fixations are the actual pauses that the eye makes. We can't see while the eye's moving, so we have to stop to take in the text. Everyone has to fixate to see the print. But some people, they stop their eyes on every single word, and that'll really slow you down. So if you're looking at every word or even at every few words, that habit's something to work on. When you're not reading word by word, your mind has to connect and build associations and patterns. You can do this because so much of a written text is redundant. That means that there's a lot of repetition. So quite a few words can be skipped without losing the meaning.
So you're saying we should try to guess the meaning?
I think I would use the term predict rather than guess. But basically the answer to your question's yes. Now this may surprise you. Using a dictionary is a good habit, right? Well, yes, in moderation. But stopping to look up every new word's a bad habit because you don't need to know every word in order to understand what you're reading. Remember what I just said about redundancy? So, stopping to use the dictionary too often, that interrupts your train of thought and prevents you from reaching your potential reading speed.
I've heard that before, and it makes sense, but...
But you're afraid to try it?
That's probably true.
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute. First, I want to point out one more problem. A lot of readers go back over the words they've already read to clarify the meaning. But this is probably the worst habit because when we're repeating twice or even more times, that causes our reading speed to drop, and it goes to 50 or even 30% of our capacity. Did I mention that this is called regression? Okay, well, this regression not only slows us down, it also makes it more difficult to understand the meaning because the way that we comprehend, we understand by connecting with the next phrase. So going back all the time makes us lose the connections. And this is what's really important in all of this. Research demonstrates a correlation between speed and comprehension. In an overwhelming number of cases, when students increase their reading speed, they also increase their comprehension of the material. So how can you do this? First, break the habits that are causing you to read slowly. Don't think the words in your head or move your lips to sound out each word. Don't let your eyes pause on every word. Don't look up every new word in the dictionary. And try not to go back over paragraphs and sentences that you've already read. But that's hard to do if you have these habits, isn't it? Especially if you're also trying to read in order to learn a new subject. That's why you're afraid to try it. Because you have to learn the content in order to pass the course, and you don't want to try something new to take a risk.
Yeah, that's about the size of it.
Well, I understand that. But you can take a risk and try to change some of those habits, but it helps if you do it in a structured environment, like the Learning Center. It's free, and you'll more than make up for the time you spend in one of the reading courses they offer when you begin to read all of your assignments at twice the speed you're reading them now.
29. What is this discussion mainly about? (30) How does the professor organize the discussion? (31) Why does the professor mention running? (32) Listen again to part of the discussion and then answer the following question.
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute. First, I want to point out one more problem.
Why does the professor say this?
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute.
(33) The professor mentions several negative habits. Match these habits to the explanations. Click on the habit and drag it to the correct explanation. (34) What would the professor probably like the students to do?